In a few minutes, tell us what are the most important framing thoughts about the state of the crisis, its origins. You've written about blip versus trend. How you think, just set it up for us, how to think about the world refugee crisis of this moment.
Thanks very much, Jim. It's good to be here. Thank you to Nancy for hosting me again, and thanks to Phil for joining the panel. I want to say three things to you. First of all, address the question, why should there be record numbers of people fleeing conflict around the world, both as refugees and IDPs? Secondly, what are their needs and their situation? And third, what can the humanitarian sector do about it? And I'll do that within my 5 minutes. 4 minutes or 5 minutes, I don't know, but I will do that basically a minute and a half each, so 4.5 minutes. Why is this happening? Why should 60 million people be fleeing conflict around the world? Why should there be 40 million IDPs and 20 million refugees? Essentially three reasons. First of all, a very difficult one to talk about, one that is easier not to talk about, but which is not honest not to talk about. There are fundamental questions being posed within Muslim-majority countries and within the Muslim worlds about the reconciliation of democracy, modernity, and theology in very fundamental ways. And the fact that IRC, an organization founded by Einstein to rescue Jews from Europe in the 1930s, should now have at least 40% of our beneficiaries being Muslim tells you that there are fundamental questions that are being asked. When I was in Lebanon last May, an academic said to me, look, what you've got to understand is it's not just, quote unquote, our version of the Reformation, which you sometimes hear said in Western capitals. It's a combination of the Reformation, the Declaration of Independence, the American Civil War, and the collapse of communism all at the same time. So the first driver of the major refugee and IDP flows are these convulsions in the Islamic world. The second is that there are a growing number of weak states around the world, symbolized sadly by South Sudan, states that are neither able to meet the basic needs of their own citizens nor able to contain ethnic, political, and religious difference within peaceful boundaries. And a country that was 99% united in its referendum for independence has now become divided within 3 years of its independence, and 4.5 million people are in food need, 1.5 million people displaced within a population of 10 million. The third reason is, in my view, is that the international system, the international political system, is weaker and more divided than at any time since the end of the Cold War. And in some ways you could make the argument, I don't know whether we'll go to this isn't really a foreign policy seminar, but you could make the argument that while the international political system isn't more divided than at any time since the Cold War. Obviously, during the Cold War, it isn't more divided than during the Cold War. The Cold War was a singular division of the world into two blocks. You can make the case that the international political system is more fragmented now than it was during the Cold War. But so I'd put to you, if you're asking yourself the question, why should this be happening? Why should there be the number of wars within countries that are driving these flows? Those would be my three answers. Second point, I think it's very important that people understand there aren't just more needs, there are different needs. The current 60 million refugees and IDPs are more urban than their predecessors. 60% of refugees and IDPs are in urban areas, not in refugee camps. They are younger than their predecessors. 50% of them are under the age of 15, I think was the statistic that I saw. They're more Muslim, as I've said. They're displaced for longer, the 17 years figure that Mr. Leach, President Leach rightly referred to, shows you that you've got a elongation of the displacement, both within countries and across borders. So I think it's really important that people understand that there isn't just more need for which we need more aid. There is different need for which we need different aid. And it's very, very important to me that we have a debate about better aid, not just more aid. It's true that we need more money. It's true that it's a scandal the World Food Programme should be halving its voucher level of support in Lebanon from $26 to $13 a month. But we need different kinds of aid to speak to the more urbanized, longer term, etc. Populations. Thirdly, how does the humanitarian sector have to change? I think it has to change in some fundamental ways. It needs a much clearer set, a more focused set of shared outcomes that it's trying to pursue. If you think about the Sustainable Development Goals that were rightly referred to, they hardly mention people in conflict. There's one goal, Goal 16, which is devoted to peace and tranquility, and that's a step forward. But if you ask yourself, what's the goal for kids caught up in conflict? In the education goal, there isn't a target for that. If you ask, what about women and girls suffering violence? Is there a reference to women and girls in conflict in the commitment to equality for women and girls? There isn't that reference in the targets. So we need a shared set of outcomes to bind the humanitarian community together. Secondly, we need those outcomes to bind in the development community as well as the humanitarian community, because many of the places that we're working are fragile states, not necessarily poor states. At the moment, Lebanon and Jordan, the World Bank isn't allowed to work there because they're middle-income countries. And that's a ridiculous situation given the level of need that exists there. I would argue there needs to be a much stronger evidence base to what the humanitarian sector does. We at IRC have said that we're going to make all of our programs evidence-based or evidence-generating in the next 5 years because we want to strengthen the evidence base of what we're doing. It's not strong enough at the moment. And finally, and in conclusion, we are, the humanitarian sector, a $22 billion sector of the global economy. Before you think that's a lot of money, Facebook paid $19 billion to buy WhatsApp. So that's the relative valuation of the sector. But if this was a low-tech sector, if you want to call this a low-tech sector of the economy, it would be investing $75 million a year on proportion into research and development, into R&D. But there isn't a systematic R&D fund or funding in the humanitarian sector, and we've got to start thinking about ourselves as a sector that's got to take seriously the need for those kind of breakthrough initiatives. So my point to you is that there is a decade of disorder. It does have fundamental roots. It does need to be tackled by politics, but its symptoms, which are humanitarian misery on a very large and changing scale, can be addressed in a more effective way if the humanitarian and development actors, so-called, get our act together.
Great. Thank you very much, David Miliband. That was an exemplary presentation of cause, needs, and solutions. So thank you very, very much.